Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about the dangers of nostalgia and comic book collecting. I would say most, if not all of us, are aware of nostalgia, what that means. It's this feeling of days gone by, how it was better in the old days. Well, I think most, if not all, comic book collectors have some nostalgia that are driving their purchases, and I don't necessarily think that that's always a good thing. Comic book collectors and action figure guys and Star Wars guys, we are known to be very nostalgic. We are hopeful and wishing for the good old days to return when Star Wars was good, when comic books were right, and when action figures were made of quality materials. Well, nostalgia seems to be a huge part of nerd culture and comic book collecting and kind of pop culture in general now. Nostalgia is not necessarily just related to nerd culture. I asked my wife about this, Mother Goose. I said, Mother Goose, are you nostalgic for things? Did you have Barbies or action figures or a tea set or whatever that you feel like you want to go back and collect that again? And she said no. She had none of those feelings whatsoever. I said, "Well, you're nostalgic for some things, right?" And she said, "Yeah, like the changing of the seasons or certain smells or experiences and times of the year, things like that." That's what she kind of felt the most nostalgic for. And then it got me thinking, I mean, I'm nostalgic for things. Like, I'm nostalgic for my action figures when I've got them displayed in here and going back and looking through them. I'm nostalgic especially for video games. Going back, playing the old games, wanting to play them remastered. But comic books, I have no nostalgia for comic books. A lot of my comic book character nostalgia, my Marvel and DC knowledge from the past comes a lot from the animated shows, movies, the action figures, and HeroClix. I didn't have comic books when I was a kid. I didn't read comic books as a kid. So what happens is now you have an adult with money and time. What does that person buy? Because I'm sure most of you watching this video were comic book collecting as a kid. And what that means is you wanted to probably piece together things you had as a kid, runs you had as a kid, keys you had as a kid, covers that you saw on the newsstand as a kid. Those are probably things that you're looking for, trying to collect. But what this has done has really kind of let me build a collection without nostalgia. So what does that look like? What does it look like for the most nostalgic person, a kid of the 80s and 90s, like the late 80s, early 90s, that got into collecting like so many people did, versus somebody like me who is collecting now? And really, I'm kind of like a case study on what it would be to somebody with no nostalgia. The same can't be said for me with like video games, because I'm a sucker for, getting the old Super Nintendo games, having a Super Nintendo, like an original SNES, buying the crap games that I played as a kid, and then, looking back and playing them and be like, I remember, playing this game, and I remember how hard it was, and having those feelings all coming back. Like, I desire to go get those games. I have none of that for comic books. So what I think happens is a lot of people end up buying things that are not actually rare, not actually of like historical importance in the comic book industry and community, and ending up buying what they have feelings for, what they want to collect, what they have nostalgia for. What happens is you end up with a short box and a long box full of homage covers of Spider-Man #1 and X-Men #1, and you probably paid a pretty penny for those, and in reality those books are neither rare nor historically important. A good example of this also is my dad and my old man's like desire to collect war books nowadays. if you guys have followed the channel, you know that my dad was a big war book collector. He liked GI Combat and Sergeant Fury, Sergeant Rock. These characters and these stories, he wants to relive that in a way. Feel what it was back in the mid to late 60s to be collecting those war books and putting a run, together, getting those books. That's what drives him. These books aren't extremely valuable. These books aren't really even extremely historically significant in a sense of like first appearances or key issues. But those are the things that he wants to collect. Those are the things that, would make him happy, chasing that feeling of nostalgia, getting those books back. So the big crux of this video is, I think Marvel and DC want you to be nostalgic. They want you to have member berries, remember your birthday, remember Star Wars, remember Boba Fett. I remember what it was like to be happy and young. Remember what it was like to have joy. I remember. Huge examples of this in today's culture. And just like I would think most people are aware of this by now, is Star Wars and the new trilogy. So examples of this are, they give us things that make us feel nostalgic, but they're slightly different. So examples of this are C-3PO in The Force Awakens, Episode 7. So it's like, we get C-3PO again, even though it doesn't really make sense that he's even there. But this time, he's got a red arm. It's like, oh, he's just a little bit different. He's C-3PO, but he's just a little bit different. And then we have the stormtroopers, but they're not the stormtroopers we know from the past. They're first order troops. I look at them and I'm like, yeah, that's a stormtrooper, but I see the helmet, I see the face on the helmet, and I'm like, that's a little bit different. You know what I mean? It gives me the feelings of the stormtrooper, but it's just a little bit different. This kind of laziness is what it is. Allows these companies to work smarter, not harder. So you don't have to actually make new characters. You don't have to actually make new ideas or stories. Basically, we just are going to repackage what has been successful in the past, repackage those feelings of what you had as a kid, nostalgia, and then sell them back to you over and over and over again. So as comic book collectors, a lot of the nostalgia comes from going to your local comic book shop and seeing the books up on the wall and picking your favorites out. You're picking your titles out, getting that pull list. A lot of the nostalgia comes from that just alone. But then we take a look back at some of like the best stories of all time. Like examples that are coming to mind are like X-Men Days of Future Past. So it's like, we're going to give you new X-Men stories, but it's basically just going to be Days of Future Past again. And this happens time and time again. I mean, how many retellings of Spider-Man and Peter Parker's origin story do we need? And we're even at the point where we're just going to give you different Spider-Man or different Spider-Men and women. And we're not going to make new characters. We're just going to put a different person in the suit and make the suit just look a little bit different. Marvel and DC, I'm assuming, think that changing a character's gender, or changing a character's sexuality, or changing a character's time frame, putting them in modern society with modern social issues, they think that is enough. That is enough for new creativity, new writing, new stories. That is enough. When in reality, what would be actually new is the people that made those stories. Chris Claremont, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, those guys, back then, they were being creative. Obviously, Marvel and DC was kind of pulling from each other's creative visions, but they were making new stories, interesting stories, new characters. something, to feel something, make new memories. They were doing that. Is that, I think that time is kind of like long gone. As far as collectors today, most collectors started back in the 80s and 90s. That was kind of the heyday of comic book collecting. So a lot of guys nowadays are trying to track down, chase down books from that time period. And as we know, in 2021, when everything exploded, a lot of these books were high sellers. These were books that, a lot of guys had and a lot of guys were selling, and they were trying to sell you a piece of your nostalgia. Well, what happened was a lot of guys were buying these books overpriced. A lot of these guys were buying books that aren't actually rare, aren't actually, they're not scarce at all, and overpaying for them. And it kind of opens my eyes to nostalgia is kind of more powerful of a collecting drive than I think anything else. More so books that are like key issues or first appearances. This nostalgia drive, this feeling of collect what you love, seems to be a more powerful driving force than anything else, really. And as somebody, again, who doesn't have that nostalgia, you find things to love. You find new things to enjoy. You look at things through an objective lens of, my 33-year-old eyes. I'm like, okay, this is a good story, or this story is crap. As opposed to a 12-year-old me looking at this story and thinking, this is the best thing ever, when in reality it was just kind of pandering and meant for a 12-year-old boy. Nostalgia doesn't just stay with Gen X and millennials. I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha will also have nostalgia, but the question is what will future generations feel nostalgic for? Will they have that collecting bug? Will they have that collecting itch? I made a video about kids will not care about your comic book collection, and I had a lot of young people reach out to me and tell me that's not true. They are collectors. But the real thing is societally, there's a lot of people that predict we're going to have this societal fog, this memory loss, this loss of information and importance and drive of collecting, specifically comic books. And it's like, will Gen Z and Gen Alpha care at all about comics, or will they want to learn? Will they want to learn about the stories and want to learn about the characters, or will the movies just be enough? I don't know. I can't predict that future, but it does seem it is kind of a head scratcher as far as I don't think these future generations will really prioritize collecting as much as we do. And to kind of wrap this up, is nostalgia bad? Absolutely not. I think having memories of the past, remembering good times, I think is amazing. It's we're very fortunate that we can remember things and feel things from the past. It feels good to remember those things. The problem is when the nostalgia becomes so addicting, so much a part of your life that you don't see what's in front of you. You don't prioritize the present, the people that you love, the things that you're doing now, your career, your experiences now, making new memories now, where so many guys fall into this trap of just completely chasing after their childhood, completely chasing after that nostalgia. And it's just a slippery slope where you're slipping farther and farther away from the here and now, the present, the tasks and the problems and the issues at hand. And it's glamorized. It's attractive to want to not worry about those things and not focus on the here and now. but rather dive farther back and back into your history, farther back, trying to relive those glory days. Having a little bit of dose of moderation, a dose of what nostalgia is, realizing that you don't need every Spider-Man #1 variant cover. You don't need all of these homage covers. Like, just take a step back and be like, maybe I don't need all of that. Guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If at any point in time you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like this video, subscribe for more. Take care.